We've talked obviously a lot about what's going to happen in the Tory party because its destruction, its falling apart is infinitely fascinating to me because we are potentially seeing the destruction of a potential once governing political party. Infinitely fascinating. These things do not happen that very often, but when they do, sometimes they can be slow, sometimes they can be long, sometimes there can be a miraculous recovery. Um, who knows? But most of the time, of course, the big thing that will really tell about the Conservative Party is whether they will slip into sort of third place or not. And I've always said, and I will always maintain, their biggest threat is not reform. Like reform is not their biggest enemy. It is this massive yellow blob that they've been ignoring for quite some time, while just concentrating on this far smaller reform blob that they're sort of trying to take a chisel and trying to chip away at. Um, but there are, of course, valid things to sort of look at when it comes to asking the question: will reform be the ones to overtake the Tories? Now, I don't think that's going to be likely to be the case. But we are going to go over to Unheard today. I know Unheard, like I say, the Conservatives' home's more crazy, bizarre uh, site. But there you go. We're going to have a look and see what they think about their fantasies about how reform can overtake the Tories before the next election. So before we go on to looking into this very much unheard proposal, do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, the one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, there's the Pony Club down below as well. So let's crack on then into this from Unheard. From their website, saying, "Can Reform UK actually overtake the Tories before the next election?" Not likely, not likely at all. Like I say, the biggest contender, as we've always said, the Lib Dems. Like every single person who worries about reform and applies all this stuff to like how reform are going to overtake the Tories, forget about the Lib Dems. They just seem to ignore that the Lib Dems are even a party or even exist, or that everything they say applies not only to just the Lib Dems, but even more so to them. So anyway, let's get back into this. So before this year's, of course, general election, Reform leader UK Nigel Farage said that his aim was, of course, to follow in the footsteps of the right-wing party that usurped Canada's progressive Conservatives in the early 90s. They said they are a model, and that's the plan, he claimed. Never, of course, naming his own party, even after the Canadian upstarts. Of course, when the Progressive Conservatives were defeated in 1993, the Reform Party won a staggering 26 times as many seats as the established party of the right. In the UK's July elections, the situation was almost exactly the reverse. The Conservatives, although suffering from the worst defeat in their history, still won at least 24 times as many seats as Reform. But while the Tories do remain principally a centre-right party, I don't think so. Not anymore. I don't think you can describe the Tories as a centre-right party anymore, to be honest. But like I say, this is unheard. So, there's a reason why, many of these people on this website do remain unheard. But there you go. So reforms, of course, success, obviously recented by the recent by-elections, does show that the party might not have to wait until the next elections to actually shake up the British political system. Again, recent by-elections. Where have these by-elections been? They've been in, mostly councillors. And so far, what we have seen in these councils, and you've got to remember, council elections, poor turnout. By-elections for councils, even poorer turnouts. So if you have a very small yet motivated voting base in a small town or a village, literally 100 extra votes can win you a council seat. That is it. That is how much it will do. And to be fair, I do agree with this what he's about to say, that the May local elections are going to be a very big test, very very big test for the Conservatives. But if you look at these recent by-elections, what have they shown? That they've actually hindered the Conservatives from winning, if more than anything, while it's been Lib Dems victories more so than any other party from these recent by-elections. So, some 2,000 councillors are, of course, up for election in May, and more than half are now Conservatives. Elected, of course, in the heavy days of the Boris Johnson when he was popular. And, of course, the Tories were, of course, receiving credit for the COVID-19 vaccine rollout. Reform, of course, barely featured in the contest and just won 2 seats. They are, of course, determined to, of course, be a bigger force this time, having now snapped up 2 victories in recent council by-elections in Kent. Again, you've won 2 council by-elections. If you look at those, the turnout for those 2 by-elections, they were smaller than even a normal by-election. You know, only like a couple of hundred people voted, which was tiny, tiny compared to these things. But of course, this is just this unfortunate state of local elections. We've talked about this before. Farage has said that he will, of course, try and throw the kitchen sink at next May's elections, and has, of course, pledged to stand in every single English countryside seat. The analysis by Election Maps UK shows that the net impact that could actually have. Since the election in seats where Reform UK hasn't stood a candidate, the Tories have obviously gained 3.6% of the vote, where Reform has been on the ballot. The Conservatives lost about 2.8. A repeat of those results would certainly get in the way of the Conservative Party recovering its electoral strength. So he just pretty much confirmed what I said, that whenever Reform UK stands, they don't pull votes away from any other party dramatically, quite like the Tories. It's the Tories who they are pulling the votes away from pretty much constantly, significantly. Also, you have, where are those other Tory votes going? There is still the case of, I don't know if he's going to mention this, the case of the missing 10%, going all the way back to when, remember, Lee Anderson was part of the Tories and he became the deputy chairman of the Conservative Party, elected basically to try and get the Conservative faithful out to vote in these by-elections, and failed quite spectacularly on 2 occasions. That, of course, resulted in now the missing 10%. Where did this 10% go? It was present in the in by-elections. It was present in the local elections. It was even present in our recent general election. And it's still, again, the couple of by-elections we've had for seats, a bit uncertain, but it does seem to be saying that yes, that missing 10% is still not returned, or still not taking part in elections. So, of course, Reform could lose salience, and of course, a good performance from the new Tory leader Kiri Badenoch, and a fresh cabinet, fresh shadow cabinet, shall we say? Of course, by playing the role of the good spoiler for a Tory recovery, could, of course, pose a risk to Farage's popularity. It won't at all. The idea that Farage takes a hit to his popularity because he's like a spoiler candidate to Tory recovery, no. No. There is a point here, a very, very salient point, which we've said many, many times. Badenoch must find a way to deal with Reform. How she deals with Reform, we don't know, but it is very, very telling that so far she hasn't really said anything about policy, about how she's going to deal with Reform, about what she's going to do to maybe, change the Tory party, because that was talked about a lot in the leadership election. So far, doesn't seem to have done a lot. And she's been in position, 3 weeks? She's not done a lot. So it could also associate Reform with not taking on the government or even the establishment, by, of course, enabling the Labour and, of course, the Lib Dems. To coin a phrase, if you come for the Tories, you better not miss. If you do, so as Farage has, you will now simply fracture the right and embolden the left. Reform voters may go disillusioned voting Reform and, of course, getting Labour or the Lib Dems. So that is what he really needs to talk about. He has split the right. Reform being there has massively split the right, quite significantly, even more so than the UKIP days. And they, used to whip themselves up into hysteria over that. But their nightmare has come true with Reform UK. It split the vote. It's continuously splits the votes in some of these by-elections where they've seen where the Reform UK candidate just pretty much pulls a significant number of votes away from the Tory candidate. So the thing is what he also isn't saying, oh yeah, these Reform voters can grow disillusioned by voting Reform. No, they're not. The Reform voters know exactly what they are doing. They do not care that they might get a Labour or Lib Dem councillors. They don't care. What they care about is sticking it to the Tories more so than anything. So while of course bleeding the Tory vote and of course splitting the right does seem to be the most now likely outcome of the 2024 election, which saw the party pick up 4 million votes, could easily of course be now a stepping stone to eventual dominance of the right. Again, eventual dominance. I've yet to see any evidence that there is going to be any eventual dominance of the right. Instead, for England's now local elections, the Wales and the Senate contest in 2026, now may be their best opportunity to gain more power. Back in July, Reform were at least nipping at the Tory heels in Leave voting Wales. Polls just 70 few thousand votes. Reform could still even be closer had the party, of course, failed to nominate a candidate in Brenad Gwent, and of course Rimney, when their candidates withdrew after allegations of posting racist content online. Reform UK selecting the best candidates. If Reform can, of course, improve on this performance, they could actually truthfully call themselves Wales' principal right-wing party. Scotland will no doubt be, of course, more difficult. More of its electorate voted to remain, and of course, the forces of Scottish nationalism rendered Farage a very uniquely English sort of politician. That said, even in the Labour heartland of Mill Hill and Glasgow, Reform came third in this week's council by-elections. Success in Wales could be a blueprint for the rest of the country. And then, if they do gain control in Wales, then what do they do? If they do somehow manage this dramatic win in Wales, which again many of the far right fringes are saying they're going to absolutely conquer Wales, and Reform is going to be like the first big win for Reform. If they do get in and manage to take control of the Senate, okay, what do they do? Like, they've then got to actually start governing, and once they start governing, that's where things are going to start to fall to pieces, because then they've got to actually start implementing policy. What reactions do they get when that policy inevitably starts to fail? A lot of things they've got to actually, seriously consider. And even if they do win, sometimes winning can be like the worst thing ever. If Farage ever somehow became, UK Prime Minister, he would be the dog that caught the ambulance. He wouldn't know what to do with it. Yeah, he'd be in charge. He'd be able to make policy and do policy. But you look at Reform UK's manifesto, it was Liz Truss on steroids. Do you think, after actually having Liz Truss and seeing a brief glimpse of what that maybe could have been like had she been allowed to go full bore and do that, continue uninterrupted, we would be in a far worse shape than possible. And yet people like Farage, free market fundamentalist, want to sort of go even harder on her policies. So yes, if anything, I really do really think that, if anything, the right in the UK has become, I think, incredibly fractured. I think, if anything, that's what Farage has done. He's, rather than make it anything, he's just taken a hammer and just smashed the right completely in a way that we on the left definitely recognize, because we see this all the time on the left. The left is very fractured when it comes to sort of voting, when it comes to electing. This is why we've always said left-wing parties have to very much rely on a lot of centrists to come and vote for them as well. That's just the nature of UK politics. And of course, centrists, the biggest voting bloc. Left, right, centrists outnumber them both quite significantly. So, I think Farage has, permanently shattered, I think, the reform. I think what he's doing now is trying to sort of reform the party, making an electoral machine stuff. And there's been a couple of stuff going on now recently about that. How successful that will be, I don't know. What matters, of course, can you actually win elections? Can you actually break through to the electorate? Can you actually, once you win power, do something about these problems that you've gone on about? What are your policies going to end up actually eventually doing? Look at what's going to happen potentially with Trump across the pond. Promise the earth, and people are expecting him to deliver, but when he inevitably doesn't, what do you think is going to happen? Farage is exactly the same, but he has never ever been in a position where he has actually had to deliver. Never been in that position. So we'll see what happens, but I do not think that they are going to be overtaking them before the next general election. I think that is very, very much a pie in the sky thinking. There's no evidence to say that's going to currently happen. Even if they do manage to take the Welsh Senate, well, okay, again, they've got to actually, be in power in the Welsh Senate. What are they going to do? What policies are they going to, pursue? All these things could come back to bite them. Winning an election is one thing, actually governing is something completely else. And that is something they have yet to really actually be tested on. And I think they're going to fail spectacularly on that, because they promised the earth just like Trump did. And eventually, the sky is going to come falling down on them. So with that, let me know what you think down below, of course. And of course, there's the Patreon page, the Buy Me Coffee link where you can buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button. Thank you very much to everyone who does help support the channel. Like I say, click the like and share button on your way out. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.